The great hall of the Galactic Senate on Orin Prime was filled with noise. Hundreds of species sat in their floating seats, arranged in wide circles that rose toward the ceiling like the inside of a giant bowl. Light came from everywhere and nowhere. The air smelled different depending on which section you stood in, because every species breathed something slightly different. Translators hummed in every ear, turning 1,000 languages into one. Consul Mitha opened the session. She was tall and thin, with silver skin that reflected light like polished metal. She had led the Senate for over 60 years, and she spoke with the lazy confidence of someone who had never been seriously challenged. She welcomed the delegates, listed the matters of the day, and moved quickly to the main agenda. Warlord Drenak of the Caliph Dominion stood. He was massive, broad-shouldered, with dark red skin covered in ceremonial scars. His voice filled the chamber without effort. He announced that the Caliph Dominion intended to reclaim 3 border systems that were, in his words, historically Caliph territory. 2 of those systems contained human colony worlds. One was called New Busan. The other was Danwal Station. There was no shock in the chamber. The Caliph had been expanding for decades, and the Senate had allowed it every time. It was easier to let the strong take from the weak than to risk a real conflict. That was how the galaxy worked. Everyone knew it. Nobody said it out loud. Yunari stood from the human seat. She was small compared to most of the aliens in the room. She wore a dark blue suit, simple and clean, with no decorations. Her black hair was pulled back tightly. Her voice was calm and clear when she spoke. She cited the Galactic Charter, Article 12, which guaranteed the sovereignty of recognized colony worlds. She reminded the Senate that New Busan had been settled for over 90 years. She asked, politely, for the motion to be denied. Consul Mitha looked at her the way someone might look at a child who had wandered into a meeting. She reminded Nari that humanity held an embassy seat but no voting power. The matter, she said, was between established civilizations. Several delegates laughed. Not cruelly exactly, more like the way you laugh when something small tries to act big. Nari's expression did not change. She sat down. Then Elder Rotham rose. The laughter stopped. Rotham was Valesi, one of the oldest species in the galaxy. His body was thin and bent with age, his skin a pale green that had faded almost to white. His eyes were large and dark, and very, very tired. He had lived for over 10,000 years. He had watched civilizations rise, burn, and disappear. When he spoke, even Drenak listened, though he did not want to. Rotham's voice was soft, but it carried. He told the chamber a story. He said that long ago, before humans had even left their own world, Valesi observers had studied Earth. They had watched from orbit as humans split the atom and used it to destroy 2 of their own cities. They had watched as humans fought world wars that killed millions upon millions of their own kind. And then they had watched as those same humans crawled out of the ruins, buried their dead, and built again. Stronger, faster, angrier. He paused and looked around the chamber slowly. His eyes settled on Drenak. He said very quietly that in 10,000 years of watching species across the galaxy, he had never once encountered a people who fought harder when they were wounded. He said that cornering a human was not like cornering any other species. Most species, when they were beaten, accepted it. Humans did not. Humans remembered, and they came back. He finished with a single warning: do not corner the humans. The chamber was silent for 3 heartbeats. Then Drenak laughed. It was a big, booming laugh that echoed off the walls. He called Rotham a sentimental old relic clinging to fairy tales about a primitive species. Several of his allies laughed with him. Consul Mitha smiled politely and thanked Rotham for his words, in the tone people used when they had already decided to ignore what they had just heard. The vote was called. The motion passed with an overwhelming majority. The Caliph Dominion was authorized to annex the 3 border systems, including New Busan and Danwal Station. Nobody voted against it. Nobody abstained. It was unanimous. Nari gathered her things and left the chamber without a word. Her face was perfectly still. She walked through the long, curved corridor outside the Senate Hall, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor. She pulled out her communicator and sent a single encrypted message to Admiral Kang Do-hyun on Earth. The message was short. It read, "They voted yes, all of them." She was almost to the exit when she heard quick footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Envoy Tessara, a young Valesi woman with bright green skin and nervous eyes. Tessara caught up to her, slightly out of breath. She apologized. She said she was sorry for the vote, sorry for the Senate, sorry that no one had listened. Her voice was shaking slightly. Nari looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was a small, gentle smile, the kind that did not reach the eyes. She told Tessara not to apologize. Then she said something that Tessara would remember for the rest of her life. "Remember where you were standing when this started." Tessara blinked, confused. Before she could ask what that meant, Nari turned and walked away. Her footsteps faded down the corridor. The door closed behind her. Tessara stood alone in the hallway for a long time. She did not understand the words yet. Everyone would. Back in the Senate chamber, the delegates were already moving on to the next agenda item. Drenak was laughing with his generals. Consul Mitha was reviewing trade agreements. Nobody noticed that Elder Rotham had not sat back down. He stood at the window of the chamber, staring out at the stars, with his ancient, tired eyes. His hands were clasped behind his back. His lips moved, but no sound came out. If anyone had been close enough to read them, they would have seen a single word, repeated over and over. Fools. The Caliph fleet arrived at New Busan on a Tuesday morning, local time. There were over 300 warships, arranged in a wide crescent formation that blocked out the stars. General Boreth commanded the fleet from the bridge of his flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Iron Fang. He expected the operation to last 2 days at most, a small human colony, a token defense force, and then surrender. That was how these things always went. The first sign that something was wrong came when the scanners showed the surface. The cities were dark. The farmlands were empty. The roads were clear. Boreth ordered a deeper scan. The results confirmed it. Every civilian on New Busan was gone. Every man, woman, and child had been evacuated. The hospitals were empty. The schools were empty. Even the animals were gone. The entire planet had been stripped of its people, in complete silence, without a single distress call or refugee ship being detected on any Caliph sensor. Borath felt something cold move through his chest, but he pushed it away. It did not matter. The planet was the objective, not the people. Then the transmission came through on open frequency. A human voice, steady and flat, speaking in accented but perfect galactic common. "This is Captain Park Ji-hwan of the Terran warship Baiko. You are entering sovereign human space. You will not receive another warning." Borath looked at the tactical display. There were 8 human ships in orbit around New Busan. 8 against 300. He almost smiled. He ordered his fleet to advance. The battle began and ended in less than 6 hours. But those 6 hours changed Borath forever. The human ships did not retreat. They flew directly into the Caliph formation and began fighting at close range, so close that the larger Caliph ships could not use their long-range weapons without hitting each other. The humans used tactics that no one in the Caliph military had ever seen or trained for. They launched swarms of small drones that attached themselves to Caliph hulls and detonated. They fired gravity pulse weapons that bent space around Calith engines and tore them apart from the inside. When one human frigate lost its weapons, its captain turned the ship around and rammed it directly into a Calith cruiser at full speed, venting the reactor as it hit. The explosion destroyed both ships and damaged 3 others nearby. Jiwan commanded from the Baiko until the ship was burning around him. He gave the order to evacuate only when the bridge was breached. He and his crew ejected in escape pods and were picked up later by a Calith patrol ship. When Borath's soldiers opened the pod, they expected to find broken, terrified humans. Instead, they found Jiwan sitting calmly with his crew, his uniform burned and his face cut, staring straight ahead with eyes that held no fear at all. Only patience. The Calith won the battle, but they lost 11 warships, 11 capital ships, destroyed by 8 human vessels that should have surrendered before a single shot was fired. Borath wrote his report carefully. He called it a victory. He did not mention the feeling that had settled into his stomach and refused to leave. The news reached the Galactic Senate within hours. The Caliths celebrated. Drenak made a speech about the swift and righteous reclamation of Calith territory. Other empires sent quiet congratulations. The matter, it seemed, was settled. Then, Earth went silent. It happened all at once. The human embassy on Orin Prime closed its doors. Nari and her entire staff boarded a shuttle and left without a press statement, without a farewell, without a single word. Every human communication frequency across the galaxy went dark. Trade channels closed, diplomatic lines disconnected, scientific exchanges halted. The humans did not declare war. They did not issue threats. They did not demand negotiations. They simply stopped talking. The silence unsettled the galaxy more than any threat could have. Species that had barely noticed humanity before now found themselves checking human frequencies every few hours, waiting for something, anything. But there was nothing, just silence, vast and heavy, like the moment before a storm. Elder Rotham watched the news from his study on the Valesi homeworld. Tessara sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, her young face tight with worry. She asked him what the silence meant. Were the humans giving up? Were they afraid? He stared at the screen showing the empty frequencies and the closed embassy and the dark, quiet border of human space. Then he said, very softly, that they were not retreating. They were loading. Tessara did not understand. She would. On Earth, the silence had a purpose. Deep beneath the surface of a mountain range that had no name on any public map, Admiral Kang Do-hyun sat at a long table with the people who mattered most. Commander Han Tae-sung was there, still and solid as stone, his face carrying the scars of the colony wars that had nearly broken humanity 20 years ago. Shin Eunji was there too, a small woman with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers who had spent most of her adult life inside laboratories that did not officially exist. Eunji placed a file on the table. It was labeled Project Hwanung. She explained it quickly and clearly, without emotion. It was a weapon system unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Not a bomb, not a fleet killer. Something worse. Something that could change the shape of a war before the first shot was fired. It had been in development for 3 years. It had been locked behind 3 separate ethical review boards because of what it could do. Do-hyun asked how long it would take to deploy. Eunji said 6 months. Do-hyun looked at Tae-sung. Tae-sung looked back at him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Do-hyun authorized it with a single word. Tae-sung stood and left the room. He had soldiers to gather. Not hundreds, not thousands, every single one. Above them, the stars were quiet. The galaxy was still celebrating. Nobody was watching the dark side of Earth's moon, where the first of the hidden shipyards had already powered on its lights. Nobody was watching. 3 months, After the fall of New Busan, Warlord Drenak walked through the Galactic Senate like he owned it. And in many ways, he did. The Kalis Dominion had grown bolder since the annexation. Drenak had begun pressuring two more minor species to surrender their border systems, and no one in the Senate had the courage to stop him. His fleet was the largest in the galaxy. His soldiers were feared on 100 worlds. And the only species that had tried to resist him had gone silent and hidden in their little corner of space like wounded animals. That was the story Drenak told, and the galaxy believed it. He stood before the Senate and gave a speech about strength and order. He said the humans had been a test case, proof that the galaxy's expansion could continue without serious resistance. He said that smaller species needed to understand their place. Consul Mytha sat in her chair and nodded along with a thin smile. She had always believed that peace was best maintained by letting the powerful do what they wanted. It was ugly, but it was stable, and stability was all that mattered. Other empires watched and learned. If the Caliph could take human worlds without consequence, then perhaps they could take worlds too. Quiet meetings began happening in back rooms across the Senate. Maps were drawn. Borders were redrawn. The strong began to circle the weak. Nobody talked about humanity anymore. They were yesterday's news. But Tessara could not stop thinking about them. She spent her nights in the Valesi archives, the oldest library in the galaxy, buried deep beneath the surface of her homeworld. Elder Rotham had given her access to files that most Valesi had never seen, observation records from before first contact with Earth. She read them slowly, carefully, and each one made her more afraid. 2 cities, destroyed in a flash of light brighter than the sun, and the humans had done it to themselves. She read about the world wars, conflicts so large that they had reshaped the entire planet. She read about something called the Cold War, where 2 human nations had pointed enough weapons at each other to destroy their worlds several times over, and then sat there for decades, daring each other to blink. Neither one blinked. But the file that stayed with her longest was not about weapons or wars. It was a cultural study, written by a Valesi observer over 300 years ago. It described a human concept called Han. The observer had struggled to translate it. It was not anger exactly, not sadness, not revenge. It was something deeper than all of those. A wound that did not heal, a memory that did not fade, a feeling that sat inside the chest like a hot coal and burned slowly for years, for decades, for generations. The observer wrote that Han did not make humans reckless. It made them patient. It made them plan. It made them wait until the moment was right, and then act with a focus that was almost frightening. Tessara closed the file and sat in the dark for a long time. Meanwhile, on the frontier of human space, strange things were happening. Caliph scout ships patrolling the border began sending back reports that made no sense. They detected massive energy readings deep inside human territory, far beyond sensor range, like distant thunder that you could feel, but not hear. Jump points near human space flickered with gravitational disturbances that had no natural explanation. Twice, scout captains reported seeing engine signatures appear on the edge of their sensors, and then vanish instantly, as if something enormous had been there for a moment, and then simply disappeared. General Borath collected these reports and brought them to Drenak. He suggested sending a larger reconnaissance force to investigate. Drenak read the reports, tossed them aside, and called them sensor ghosts. He told Borath to stop jumping at shadows. The humans were a broken species hiding behind their borders. There was nothing to worry about. Borath said nothing, but he did not delete the reports. He kept them in a personal file and read them again every night before he slept. 6 months passed since the fall of New Busan. The galaxy had moved on. Humanity was a footnote. The Senate was discussing trade routes and resource allocations and all the boring things that powerful civilizations discussed when they believed they were safe. Then every screen in the Galactic Senate lit up at the same time. The delegates froze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Every display, every monitor, every holographic projector in the chamber showed the same image. A human male in a dark uniform, sitting behind a simple metal desk. His hair was short and black. His face was calm. His eyes were steady and completely empty of emotion. Admiral Kang Do-hyun spoke. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, and the translators carried it perfectly into every language in the room. He said, "To the Caliph Dominion and the governments that sanctioned the invasion of our worlds, you were warned. You laughed. You will not laugh again. What follows is not war. It is a lesson." The transmission ended. The screens went dark. The chamber was silent. Consul Mytha's silver face had gone pale. Drenak stood slowly, his jaw tight. He called it a bluff. He said the humans were desperate, putting on a show because they had nothing else. His voice was loud and firm, but for the first time, some of the delegates noticed that his hands were shaking. In the back of the chamber, Elder Rotham stood up from his seat. He did not speak. He did not look at anyone. He simply turned and walked toward the exit, slowly, the way very old people walk when they are in no hurry, because they already know what is coming. Tessara hurried after him. She caught him in the corridor and asked where he was going. Rotham did not stop walking. He said very quietly that he was going somewhere far from what was about to happen. Tessara felt the cold move through her body like ice water. She looked back at the Senate chamber, where Drenak was still talking, still insisting that there was nothing to fear. Then she turned and followed Rotham down the corridor, away from the noise, away from the light, into the quiet. Behind them, the galaxy held its breath. The first Kalith system to fall was Vorath, a military outpost on the edge of Dominion space. The garrison commander sent a distress signal at 0300 local time. He said that human ships had appeared from nowhere, dozens of them, moving in perfect formation, and that his jump gate had gone dark. The signal cut off 11 minutes later. When Kalith reinforcements arrived 2 days later, they found the outpost intact, the garrison disarmed, and every soldier sitting in rows on the ground, with their weapons stacked neatly in front of them. Nobody had been killed. The jump gate was offline. No one could explain how. Then the same thing happened at Kelos Station, then at Dren's Reach, then at the boundary forts. One by one, across the entire frontier of the Caliph Dominion, military installations went silent. Jump gates died. Communication relays shut down. And out of the darkness came the human fleet. It was larger than anything the galaxy had believed possible. Over 1,000 warships, built in secret, inside hollowed-out asteroids and hidden shipyards buried in the atmosphere of gas giants. Carriers, destroyers, cruisers, and at the center of it all, the Taebek, Admiral Kang Do-hyun's flagship, a massive vessel painted black with a single white stripe along its spine. Beside it flew the Dokubae, a fast-attack cruiser commanded by Captain Park Ji-hwan, the same man who had lost his ship at New Busan and had waited 6 months in a Kalith prison cell for this exact moment. He had been recovered during the liberation of Vorath. He had not smiled when they freed him. He had simply asked for a new ship. The galaxy watched in disbelief as reports flooded in. The humans were not attacking randomly. They were not burning worlds. They were doing something much worse. They were cutting the Kalith Dominion apart piece by piece, like a surgeon removing a disease. Project Hwanung was the blade. Shin Unji's weapon did not destroy ships or kill soldiers. It destabilized the quantum field that made faster-than-light travel possible. When activated near a jump gate, the gate simply stopped working. Not damaged, not destroyed, just dead. And without jump gates, the Caliph fleet could not move. Ships that were light years apart could not reinforce each other. Supply lines collapsed. Communication between systems slowed from instant to weeks. The largest military in the galaxy was suddenly a collection of isolated garrisons, each one alone, each one blind. Drenak screamed orders from this throne world. Send reinforcements, reactivate the gates, counterattack. But there was nothing to send. His fleet was scattered across 100 systems, with no way to reach each other. His generals sent back the same message again and again. The gates are down. We cannot move. We are alone. The liberation of New Busan came on the 7th day. Commander Han Tae-sung led the ground assault personally. He dropped from orbit with 10,000 soldiers in fast ascent pods that punched through the atmosphere like meteors. The Caliph garrison on New Busan had been cut off from resupply for 5 days. They were tired, confused, and afraid. They had heard the reports from other systems. They knew what was coming. Tae-sung gave them one chance. He broadcast a message on all frequencies. Surrender now. You will be treated fairly. This is your only offer. Half the garrison surrendered within the first hour. The other half fought. Tae-sung's soldiers moved through the colony with cold, mechanical precision. Every building was cleared. Every position was taken. There was no rage in the way they fought. No screaming, no chaos. Just quiet, disciplined, terrifying efficiency. Jihwan provided support from orbit, the Dokebi's weapons striking Caliph positions with accuracy that seemed almost impossible. The battle lasted 72 hours. When it was over, Tae-sung stood in the central square of New Busan, the same square where the colony's founders had planted the first tree 100 years ago. The tree was gone. The square was scorched and broken. But Tae-sung planted the Terran flag in the burned ground, and a camera drone captured the image, the flag, the ruins, and behind it, the sunrise, golden and warm, breaking over the horizon of a world that had been taken and was now taken back. That image was broadcast on every galactic frequency. It did not need words. Everyone understood. The dismantling of the Caliph Dominion took 3 weeks. System by system, the Terran fleet moved through Caliph military space and shut everything down. Bases were disabled. Weapons were confiscated. Ships were grounded. And through all of it, the humans followed a pattern that confused and disturbed the watching galaxy more than any act of violence could have. They did not bomb cities. They did not harm civilians. They did not loot or burn or destroy anything that was not a military target. Prisoners were fed, given medical treatment, and held in clean facilities. Caliph officers who surrendered were spoken to with a calm, professional courtesy that was almost more frightening than cruelty, because it meant the humans were not angry. They were not out of control. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they had chosen to be precise. The final battle took place above the Caliph throne world. Drenak had gathered every ship he had left, a desperate fleet of about 60 vessels, and arranged them in a defensive ring around his planet. Dohyun brought 400 ships. He opened a channel and offered terms. Full withdrawal from all annexed systems, reparations for the colonies that had been attacked, permanent demilitarization of Caliph border regions, and a public apology from Drenak to the species he had displaced. Drenak refused. He called Dohyun a fool and swore that the Caliph would never kneel. The battle lasted 4 hours. At the end of it, Drenak's fleet was gone, not retreated, gone. Every ship disabled or destroyed. Drenak's flagship was boarded by Tae-sung's marines. They found the warlord on his bridge, standing, his weapon drawn. Tae-sung walked toward him alone, unarmed, and looked him in the eyes. Drenak stared back. Then slowly his weapon fell from his hand. That night, Dohyun visited Drenak in the brig of the Taebek. He sat across from the warlord in a small metal chair. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said that he had not come to gloat. He had come to tell Drenak something important. He said that the Caliph people would not be enslaved. Their worlds would not be burned. Their children would not grow up in chains. That, he said, was the difference between them. He asked Drenak to remember it. Drenak said nothing, but his eyes, for the first time since the war began, were not angry. They were something else, something that looked very much like shame. 1 year after the fall of New Busan, the Galactic Senate convened again on Orin Prime. The same hall, the same floating seats, the same light that came from everywhere and nowhere. But the room felt different now. The air was heavier. The voices were quieter. The laughter that had once filled the chamber was gone, replaced by something careful and measured, the way people speak when they have recently learned that words have consequences. Consul Mitha stood at the center podium. She looked older than she had a year ago. The silver of her skin seemed duller, as if the light had been drained from it. She read from a prepared statement in a voice that held none of its old confidence. She proposed that humanity be granted a full seat on the Galactic Senate, with complete voting power, effective immediately. She did not explain why. She did not need to. The vote was called. It was unanimous. Every species, every delegation, every single seat in the chamber voted yes. There was no discussion, no debate, no objections. The same Senate that had unanimously voted to let the Caliph take human worlds now unanimously voted to give humanity everything it had been denied. The irony was not lost on anyone, but nobody mentioned it out loud. The doors at the far end of the chamber opened, and Yoon Nari walked in. She looked exactly the same as the day she had left. Dark blue suit, hair pulled back, no decorations. She walked the long path to the human seat, which had been moved from the back of the chamber to a position near the center, and she sat down without hurrying. The entire Senate watched her in silence. When she spoke, her voice was warm. She talked about cooperation. She talked about the future. She talked about the mistakes of the past year and the opportunity to build something better. She said that humanity had not fought for power or territory. They had fought because their homes were taken, and they wanted them back. Nothing more. She said that Earth's hand was open to any species that wanted peace. She smiled as she said it, and the smile was real. But everyone in the room felt what she did not say. It hung in the air, like smoke. They could have done worse. They had the power to burn the Caliph Dominion to ash, and they had chosen not to. They had the technology to shut down every jump gate in the galaxy, and they had used it on only one enemy. They had been merciful, and every person in that chamber understood that mercy was not weakness. It was a choice, and choices could change. Nobody clapped when Nari finished speaking. They simply nodded, one by one, in silence. The Caliph Dominion had been reduced to its original borders, the systems it had held before its expansion began. Warlord Drenak was tried by an independent tribunal made up of 12 species. He was not executed. He was sentenced to exile on a remote world at the edge of Valesi space, where he would live out the rest of his life in a small house surrounded by nothing but wind and grass. Some said it was too lenient. Others said it was worse than death for a man like Drenak, who had built his identity on power, to be given none at all. General Borath had surrendered early in the war, 3 days after the jump gates went down. He had seen the pattern before anyone else, and understood that fighting was pointless. He cooperated with the transition government and helped rebuild the Caliph military into a purely defensive force. He never spoke publicly about the war, but those who worked with him said that he kept a file on his desk, a collection of sensor reports from the months before the human counterattack, the strange readings, the ghost signatures, the gravitational anomalies he had tried to warn Drenak about. He kept it as a reminder of what happened when warnings were ignored. A new Caliph government formed slowly, led by civilians rather than warlords for the first time in Caliph history. Their first diplomatic act was to send an ambassador to Earth. The ambassador was a young Caliph woman with none of Drennick's scars and all of his people's pride, but tempered now with something that looked like humility. When she met Nari on Earth, her first words were simple. She said that the Caliph would like to understand humanity better. Nari looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Start with our history, all of it." On the Valesi homeworld, Elder Rotham sat in his archive surrounded by 10,000 years of records. The room was dim and quiet. Dust floated in the thin light that came through a single window. Tessara sat across from him, older now, her bright green skin beginning to show the first faint lines of age. She had been promoted to senior envoy. She had earned it. She asked Rotham if he was satisfied. He did not answer immediately. He turned a small stone over in his fingers, an old habit, and stared at nothing for a long time. Then he shook his head slowly. He said he was not satisfied. He said he had warned the Senate because he hoped they would listen. If they had listened, none of this would have happened. No battles, no dead, no ruins. Just a vote that went the other way, and a galaxy that treated a young species with the basic respect it deserved. Tessara was quiet. Then she asked him what he had always known about humans that the rest of the galaxy had not. Rotham looked out the window at the stars. They were bright and cold and very far away. He said that humanity did not seek war. They did not enjoy it. They did not celebrate it the way the Caliph did. But when war found them, they finished it. Every single time. That was the truth the galaxy had failed to understand. Not that humans were violent. Every species was violent. But humans were something else. They were patient, they were precise, and they did not stop. Tessara nodded slowly. She would carry those words with her for the rest of her career. And she would repeat them every time a delegate suggested that a younger species could be pushed without consequence. On New Busan, the colony was alive again. It had taken a year to rebuild, and the scars were still visible. Burned walls and cracked roads and empty lots where buildings used to stand. But new structures had risen among the ruins. Children played in streets that had been battlefields. Markets had reopened. Lights glowed in windows at night. Park Ji-hwan stood on a hill, overlooking the colony at sunset. He had been promoted to Commodore, but he still wore his old captain's jacket when he was off duty. The hill was the same one where he had watched the Baekho burn in orbit a year ago. He could still see the spot in the sky if he looked hard enough, though there was nothing there now but stars. Han Tae-sung sat beside him on the grass, his arms resting on his knees, his scarred face turned toward the horizon. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They did not need to. They had fought together, bled together, and buried friends together. Words were not necessary between men like that. Above them, Terran ships moved slowly across the darkening sky, running their patrol routes in long, quiet arcs. They were not conquerors. They were not occupiers. They were guardians, and everyone on the surface and in the Senate and across the galaxy understood what that meant. Ji-hwan broke the silence. He asked, quietly, if Tae-sung thought they would try again. Any of them. The Caliph, another empire, anyone. Tae-sung watched the stars for a long time. The patrol ships blinked as they passed overhead, small lights against the vast dark. The wind moved through the grass. The last light of the sun faded behind the mountains. "No," he said finally, "but we will be ready if they do." They sat together on the hill as night fell over New Busan, and the stars came out one by one, bright and silent and endless above a world that had been lost and found again.